Hello friends and colleagues, today I want to show you some quick guide for the vetting inspection and port state control inspection on the bridge. Dear colleagues, based on my experience, I will show you only practical tips for which every inspector is focused during each inspection. In the pilot card and master to pilot information exchange checklist, all the columns should be properly filled. So there should be no any empty spaces in these checklists. And other information received from pilot should be added upon arrival to pilot station, such as pilot body and arrangements, tug arrangement scheme, tug bollard pull force, mooring scheme diagram, name of the tugs, local tide table, etc. Nowadays, it's a common practice all over the fleet to laminate checklists for bridge changeover procedure. And for good impression on the inspector, all checklists should be presented in good condition and not dirty. And of course, all the required fields with answers should be completed yes or no or not applicable. The inspector can ask you, when do you record the radar performance? Then you should reply that it is recorded every watch by duty officer and each radar was really tested. Also, he can ask you, how do you know if the radar performance is good? You should show him maker's recommendations from the manual. Then inspector can ask you to show the reading values of received and transmitted signal by the magnetron to compare the readings which were logged in the radar logbook. So you should be able to demonstrate the radar performance test and to present the working hours of the magnetron for each radar. Also, you should be able to demonstrate how to adjust gyro heading on the radar. Regarding compass observation error record book, you should pay attention that deviation from official magnetic compass table is matches with the deviation marked during calculations by duty officers, plus minus 0.5 degrees. Otherwise, you should present to the inspector that the service for the adjustment of magnetic compass was ordered, a risk assessment completed and company informed. Also, you should be able to demonstrate and explain how to calculate the gyro compass error using Norris nautical tables. All necessary security charts for the voyage should be in the latest edition. The inspector can ask you if you know in which situation you should call the master on the bridge, and you should explain and show him. For example, that visibility range decreased for less than 5 nautical miles, or when speed increased more than 25 knots, then you should call the master. Also, the inspector will check that all officers are familiar and sign the list with master standing orders. In the GMDSS logbook, you should be able to present your data routine checks, tests, also weekly and monthly tests for the equipment. Then the inspector will ask you to show him the last test call on call station with the MFHF. If the call station not replied to the test, then you could do it with another ship or vessel. And you should be able to present this test in the memory of GMDSS equipment. Also, you should be able to demonstrate GMDSS batteries on-load test and compare the readings which you mentioned in the GMDSS logbook. All Navtex and Navarea warnings received for the current voyage should be properly filed and signed by all watchkeeping officers. Also, the inspector can ask you if Navtex messages are automatically plotted on the ECDIS. And then he can ask you how do you cross-check the Navtex warnings on ECDIS. Because sometimes messages received by Navtex are with missing symbols, and in this case you should be able to demonstrate how to manually input the required information. The inspector will ask you if the vessel came direct to the pilot station or stayed at anchor some days. In the case if your vessel was at the anchorage some days, then you should present together with passage plan also amendments to this plan. And it is a good practice to show some manual writings by pen on the passage plan, because it will look like the the officers and the master are thoroughly read and worked on it. Then inspector will ask you to show him UKC calculations. If the UKC was calculated automatically for each leg, for example, if you put cat zog, so you should answer that of course manually calculated. Also he will ask you to show him calculations of safety contour and safety depth. Then he will ask you, do you have records for each security level for each leg of the voyage? The inspector doesn't have too much time to check all the paper logs, so in the logbook he will check only few items. He can ask you, when did you record changeover from autopilot to hand steering? Then he will look for proper filling of master in-con and off-con timings. He can ask you to show company procedure for bridge watch level change. Then he can ask you what is the difference between bridge watch level 1 and bridge watch level 2. Then he can also check the records of fire safety rounds. If some information is missing in deck logbook, then it should be mentioned in bell book, because it is also official document in case of any judicial disputes. For the echo sounder, the inspector can ask you to perform shallow water depth alarm test. Then he can ask you if you can change the echo sounder transducer from forward to aft, and you should be able to demonstrate this procedure. The inspector will ask you to perform hospital alarm test. Then you should send somebody to the hospital and just push the alarm button and acknowledge buzzer on the bridge. The inspector will ask you to show him Navtex station, and then he will ask how do you select the station, which stations are in use now, and you should be able to show that particular message received by Navtex is also shown on the ECDIS. The inspector can ask you, what will you do in case of both ECDIS failure? You should be able to demonstrate him chart flow diagram and explain what will you do. Also he can ask you, when did you last perform the ECDIS failure training exercise? Then inspector will ask you to perform engine room dead man alarm simulation test. Also the inspector can ask you if you know how to test a BNWAS blackout alarm system. And you should be able to demonstrate how to switch off BNWAS main power supply source. The inspector will ask you to show him bridge procedure guide and IM SAR volume, the latest editions. You should be able to demonstrate it either in hard copy or soft copies. Also he can ask you some simple questions like how many computers do you have with digital publications? Should be 2, main and backup. Then he will ask you to generate certificate for ENP ADP on the computer and ask you, is it corrected for the latest? Then Admiralty information overlay updates, also he can ask you to generate. And then inspector will ask you to test any 2 pieces of portable GMDSS radios, for example on channel 12. And the inspector will ask you, do you have a spare magnetic compass? You should be able to show him this item with no bubbles, also other navigational equipment, shapes, gong, etc. Also the inspector will check expiry dates of pyrotechnics on the bridge. You should be able to show the inspector the procedures for cancellation of false distress alarm, and also he can ask you how to send the undesignated distress alarm by SAT-C and MFHF. Of course, inspector will visit electrical equipment room to check its cleanliness and tidiness, and if present second gyro compass also his. The inspector will ask you what is the procedure to check your navigational lights alarm, and you should be able to demonstrate how to disconnect the fuse inside the panel. Then inspector can ask you to show how you disconnect the necessary fire zone from the fire control panel. The inspector will ask you to show him primary and backup ECDIS to check their alarm list. Then he will ask you to show the current route to the terminal and ask you to show him safety depth and safety contour settings which are in use. He will ask you, did you cross the safety contour? Better if you didn't cross the safety contour, because if you had crossed, then you need to present him relevant risk assessment and logbook entries. You need to present him company procedure for crossing of safety contour. Then inspector can ask you what is the definition of safety contour and safety depth. You need to reply that safety contour is the outline between safe and unsafe waters, and safety depth is the minimum depth which is required for on-ship to pass safely. Also, inspector will check markings on ECDIS for no-go areas, contingency anchorage, where you need to call the master and standby engine, etc. The inspector will ask you to show him that all charts for the current route is up to date. Then inspector will ask you to show him how to check on the chart Admiralty information overlay regarding temporary and preliminary notices. Inspector can ask you to show ECDIS presentation library. Okay, then how do you know if your presentation library on this ECDIS is compliant with latest International Hydrographic Organization standards? And you should present him the latest circular received from IHO. Also, it will be very good if you can show to surveyor how to use the date-dependent view on ECDIS and how it practically works when old symbols disappeared after the relevant date input. The inspector will ask you, show me how to adjust gyro heading on the ECDIS. And of course you should be able to demonstrate how to do it. The surveyor will ask you, where is your AIS? Then okay, show me your alarm list. You should be able to demonstrate the surveyor the emergency steering procedures. Also the changeover procedure from hand steering to autopilot. Also he can ask you how to change steering from gyro to magnetic compass. You should be able to demonstrate this. The surveyor will ask you, show me how do you perform of course alarm test. You should be able to present for inspector the last gyro annual service and gyrosphere changed dates. The manual handle for the whistle blow should be positively tested. The scale on the magnetic compass should be visible and the light is in operational condition. The inspector will ask you, where is your Aldis lamp? Okay, then test it on battery. You should be able to demonstrate. Also there should be 3 spare bulbs together with the Aldis. You should be ready to demonstrate the surveyor how you charge the Aldis lamp. The inspector will definitely check if your gyro repeaters are aligned on the bridge wings. You should be able to perform SART test, and the result of the test should be visible on the radar and on the AIS. The surveyor can ask you to show how you test the EPIRB and also the condition of hydrostatic release unit, the expiry date.